Today in GTA Does It Make You Violent? We have an interview with a head teacher and a media expert asking for their views on video game violence.
Violence, disproportionate use of physical force.
Violence is behaviour that damages other people or property. I guess beyond violence you can get into intimidating behaviour which kind of it scares people, and violence is an extension of that, I think, but it's generally behaviour that damages people or things.
I think there's a real possibility. I think it's to do with potentially the age of the child who's playing those games. We're not all the same, children are not all the same. In my job I know children are not all the same. It very much depends on the home environment that the child is playing these games, where they are playing them and how long they play for them. My anxiety is often to do with children who are playing 18 games who are clearly underage, is that they seem to be playing them in isolation in their bedrooms for long chunks of time. And that's when I do agree with the argument that you get a little bit desensitised.
It's possible that video games could increase that, but there's never been any tests that have been able to categorically prove that behaviour is influenced by the media that they consume, so whether it's violent films, violent video games. There's never really any evidence of that. It seems to me that the kind of cultural artefacts that are blamed for creating violence and for impacting on people's behaviour tend to be things that are liked by young people or by poor people. So, for example, it's often media forms that are popular with young people or poor people that get criticised mostly for creating poor performance. For example, films which are a very popular form of media, mostly watched by young people, are always being blamed for violence. Video games, again played by young people, not by old people, are always being blamed for creating violence. Opera, if you look at the plots for loads of operas, there's all sorts of violence and aggression in there. People are poisoning each other, people are having duels, people are planning and plotting murder. I've never heard anybody claim that opera is going to make people more violent. You look at the Bible is full of incredible violence. Never heard anybody claiming that the Bible should be banned because it makes people violent.
In the real life, in people coming back and reenacting,
yes.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
You see it in primary schools a lot, and sometimes you see it as a new game comes out. So you'll see children playing the moves out on the field, and of course, when the wrestling games came out, you only have to make those moves once and realise that you don't get up when you do a slam down and you land flat on somebody's back. But it is rare because I deal with secondary school children, and I think in the main, secondary children know it is fantasy. They know the difference between reality and fantasy, but that's not so much the school environment, it's probably the home environment they've been brought up in.
Yeah.
Well, I taught over a period of years. I taught a family of boys, and some of them were quite aggressive and violent, and the youngest one wasn't. Now, interestingly, the youngest one was completely into games. The rest of them weren't, but they were, and it struck me as being quite interesting. And when I talked to the father about this, he suggested that it might be because this son who was playing video games had found an outlet or a way of getting rid of his anger that wasn't, violent in the real world. But I've never actually come across an example of a game making somebody violent. Can I keep going a bit? There are some issues. I think there are other issues that may be linked to playing video games. I think it's not good for young people to play, for very young people to play too much on video games, because they're living in a world where they're so in control of everything that when they come back to the real world where they're not in control, they can get quite angry and frustrated with that. And so I think there's that problem that can happen.
The only one I know is Call of Duty. I came across this because the children call it COD, and of course I thought they were talking about fishing. I've seen elements of that on YouTube because I've seen people posting the moves around it. It looks to me like a shoot 'em up, and there have always been shoot 'em ups, and there were shoot 'em ups before there were video games. I don't know of the ones that are perhaps a little bit more left field, a little bit more sort of perhaps darker than that, because it's not an interest of mine.
No. Do you have any examples of young people that you have worked with having their behaviour influenced in a negative way by the use of their video games?
I would say definitely around ages 11 and 12, children playing not appropriate games and then coming in and reenacting. But then crucially, where I think video games affect children the most is the fact that they will play them for too long in sessions of 8-9 hours on a weekend, and that has an impact on the whole persona. They're not eating properly, they're not out, they're not socialising, they become desensitised, and it's that I think hampers their social development.
I don't think there are any particular games that I would say are extremely violent. There are games where people play in a world where violence isn't the same as it is here, and most young people accept that. If anything, I would say that games can have a cathartic effect where young people, when they're feeling in a bad mood or aggressive and they want to work it out, they can go and play on a game for an hour, and when they come off it, they're chilled out and they're relaxed. So if anything, I'd say more often than not, games can make people less violent rather than more violent.
Well, I'm pausing, so that would suggest that I don't think they're too violent in general. I think I go back to the themes I picked up in my first answer. It's about in what context are you playing those games? Are you playing them in a supervised way? Or is it become some sort of subculture that no responsible adult ever has an insight into? Some of the games taken out of context do look particularly gory, and I think children realise that they're not real. However, all it would take is you think about the influence in America, that poor soul who was influenced by the Batman movies and then decides to reenact something like that. Now, clearly, that person was influenced and didn't have anyone to challenge their perceptions of what reality would be.
Yeah. Could you name a game which is violent and explain why?
I think parents need to take a role of making sure that young people are playing games that are appropriate for the age that they're playing them for. There's quite a rigorous system of certification, and parents generally stick to that. I remember when GTA came out that there was a lot of criticism of it, and people were failing to see that there was a humour involved in GTA. Equally with games that were quite primitive now, games like Doom or Tekken and things like were accused because of the hyper reality of the graphics, it was going to make people more violent. This has been going on for a long time, really, and does it make people violent? I don't know. I think there's never been any way of making it out doing evidence. There's other things that make people violent more than games. Things like the social environment that they live in, the way that they're treated by society, the way that they're treated at home, the way that they're treated at school. Those are the kinds of things that have much more impact than just a graphic image on a television screen.
Could you name any game that you think is violent and why?